By cardiovascular disease, I mean heart attacks, strokes, and peripheral vascular disease. Males appear to be at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease than females. Obesity technically means at least 20% above ideal weight. Clearly, this puts a person at increased risk for diabetes and high blood pressure. What may be happening is that acute and chronic stress results in higher blood pressure and cholesterol levels, more smoking, overeating, etc., all of which are direct risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Today, I'm going to be speaking on risk factors for cardiovascular disease. By cardiovascular disease, I mean heart attacks, strokes, and peripheral vascular disease, which is also known as clots to the legs. When the arteries become diseased, there's a loss of elasticity so that the arteries are not as flexible as they used to be. There can also be partial or complete blocking of the arteries. When a person has a heart attack, what happens is there's a partial or complete blocking of one or more of the arteries which feed the heart muscle. In a stroke, we're talking about the blocking of one or more of the arteries which feed the brain. In peripheral vascular disease, again also known as clots to the legs, there's a partial blockage of one or more of the arteries to usually one of the legs. Now, there are risk factors which do give us an idea of who might develop one of these problems or these diseases. Some of the risk factors are alterable. That is, that the person at risk can actually do something about them. And then there are some risk factors which are unalterable. I'm going to run through the unalterable ones first and then the alterable ones second. Okay. The unalterable risk factors are number one, gender. Males appear to be at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease than females, at least up until 50 years of age. The simplest explanation is that estrogen, a hormone which is made in women's bodies up until menopause, appears to protect women from cardiovascular disease. Second, age. As a person ages, their risk of getting cardiovascular disease increases. There's not much we can do about aging, but that is a factor. That the older a person is, the higher their risk for cardiovascular disease. Third, diabetes. People with diabetes have a higher rate of cardiovascular disease. It's not known why, but unfortunately, the statistics support this. And then, family history. We all have and need to have certain amounts of fats and fatty acids that our bodies use metabolically. And as long as our cholesterol and some of these other fat-containing chemicals in the blood are kept in good, low, balanced way, they create no increased risk to a person. However, if they get to be in higher levels than is healthy, they can create a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And this is to some extent hereditary. In fact, when you hear about youngish men, let's say men in their 30s who have heart attacks or strokes, usually it's because of family history. I mean, even if they have other risk factors, having a heart attack in one's 30s is very rare, and the cause is usually hereditary. So, those are the unalterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. The alterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease include, first of all, high blood pressure. High blood pressure, again, does tend to run in families, but there are some very, very good medications that people can take that have very few side effects in order to control high blood pressure. High blood pressure often occurs in people who are obese, very overweight. But then there are many otherwise healthy people who simply have high blood pressure. And the important thing is to get these people on an appropriate medication, usually a combination of medications, and keep their blood pressure within a healthy range. And that will decrease their risk of cardiovascular disease. Next, obesity. a very high percentage of Americans are considered obese. Obesity technically means at least 20% above ideal weight. Clearly, this puts a person at increased risk for diabetes and high blood pressure. And so it's very important to get rid of that excess weight. However, if I knew how to cure obesity, I would be an extremely wealthy woman. It's a very, very complex disease process. Generally, a low-fat diet is recommended for people who are obese. Next, cigarette smoking is clearly a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. People who smoke cigarettes have more heart attacks and strokes and peripheral vascular disease, blood clots in the legs. Clearly, they have a higher incidence of these diseases earlier in life than non-smokers. Tobacco use not only raises blood pressure, but it probably affects the way fats are metabolized as well. And then psychosocial factors. And this would include social isolation, certain personality traits, and of course, daily stress, like a high-pressure work situation. The evidence suggests that these factors put a person at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. However, more research is needed to understand how stress contributes to risk for heart disease. We're not sure whether stress directly contributes to increased risk for cardiovascular disease. What may be happening is that acute and chronic stress results in higher blood pressure and cholesterol levels, more smoking, overeating, etc., all of which are direct risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And then finally, sedentary lifestyle is the last factor to be added to the list of alterable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. People who do not exercise, even if they have low blood pressure, are not obese, do not have diabetes, are female, don't smoke cigarettes, are young, control their stress, and eat a low-fat diet, people who, even if all those factors are in their favor, if a person does not exercise, they increase their chances of cardiovascular disease. So there we go, another good reason to exercise.